What if the darkest part of your mind wasn't just a thought, but a presence watching you, waiting for a moment to step through the mirror? In 1987, a renowned Jungian psychologist vanished without a trace. Decades later, people who dared to study his final work started disappearing too. This isn't just a mystery, it's a descent into the terrifying truth Carl Jung warned us about. When you confront your shadow, it might stare back and take your place. Welcome to The Truth About Your Sexual Shadow. In 1987, the town of Meiringen, nestled in the serene valleys of Switzerland, became the center of a quiet mystery that would slowly evolve into one of the most puzzling psychological cases of the decade. Dr. Felix Bauer, a well-known Jungian psychologist and lecturer, vanished without warning during what seemed like the height of his professional career. Known for his deeply philosophical approach to psychoanalysis and his obsession with Carl Jung's theories, Bauer had devoted the last 10 years of his life to exploring the darker corners of the human mind, particularly the concept of the sexual shadow. According to Jung, the shadow represents the unconscious parts of our personality that we repress or deny. For Bauer, the sexual shadow was the most potent and dangerous of these hidden selves, a place where taboo desires, repressed instincts, and unacknowledged fantasies collided. He believed that when left unexamined, this shadow could erupt in destructive and uncontrollable ways. His theories had long been dismissed as too speculative, even among fellow Jungians. But in his private practice and lectures, he maintained that he was close to understanding how this aspect of the psyche influenced violent behavior. Bauer had recently begun a new project he called the Dream Mirror Initiative, in which he analyzed his patients' dreams for archetypal symbols related to sexuality and aggression. He recorded the dreams in great detail, charting them on large, hand-drawn diagrams and comparing them to Jung's original research. According to those closest to him, he was convinced that he had discovered a pattern, a hidden structure in the unconscious that could explain the escalation from repression to eruption. He claimed that specific dream sequences, if decoded correctly, could serve as early warnings of a psychological break. To Bauer, this wasn't theory, it was fact. Then, one quiet Thursday morning, Dr. Bauer failed to show up for his lecture at the Zurich Institute. His colleagues assumed it was a scheduling mix-up. Calls to his home went unanswered. When police arrived at his modest residence-turned-clinic on the outskirts of Meiringen, they found the doors locked, no signs of forced entry, and nothing noticeably out of place. His keys were still on the hook by the door. His wallet and passport were untouched. There were no signs of struggle. Everything was calm, eerily so. But what investigators did find was a single sheet of paper laid perfectly in the center of his desk, free of fingerprints other than Bauer's. Written in neat, deliberate handwriting was a cryptic sentence: "What is hidden always finds a way to be seen." It was a chilling clue, one that offered no answers but countless interpretations. Some believed Bauer had suffered a mental breakdown and fled into the wilderness. Others speculated suicide, though no body was ever found. A few whispered that Bauer had been silenced, that he had uncovered something he was not meant to. But the most unsettling theory came from within the Jungian circle itself, that Bauer had made contact with his own sexual shadow and never returned. Several years after the baffling disappearance of Dr. Felix Bauer, his name faded from the public memory, surviving only in hushed academic circles and unread research papers. That changed in 1994 when a renovation team working on the now-abandoned Bauer Clinic made a disturbing discovery. Behind a false wall in the basement, an area previously believed to be solid concrete, they uncovered a hidden storage compartment. Inside were 2 rusted filing cabinets, a metal lockbox, and a stack of videotapes covered in dust. Each tape was carefully labeled with handwritten titles that suggested something more than ordinary therapy sessions: Descent, The Mask Falls, Projection, Ritual, Anima Rising. All were dated within the final 2 months before Bauer vanished. The tapes were handed over to authorities and eventually reviewed by a special unit attached to the cantonal police. What they saw was unnerving. The recordings appeared to be private therapy sessions, filmed without the presence of any assistants or observers. In every video, the same man sat across from Dr. Bauer. His identity was concealed in records simply as Patient X. No full name, no age, no file. Nothing about his background was ever found in Bauer's official documents. The patient's face was partially obscured in shadow, whether by chance or by design was unclear. His voice, low and deliberate, rarely rose above a whisper. At first, the sessions seemed normal. Patient X spoke of dreams, strange, recurring ones, filled with decaying buildings, mirrors that wouldn't reflect, and voices that spoke in riddles. Bauer's responses were analytical, calm, precise. But over time, a transformation occurred. The man's dreams grew darker, more violent. He spoke of impulses he couldn't control, desires that terrified him, and sensations of being watched by something he called the mirror within. As weeks passed, the man's demeanor changed. He became agitated, erratic. Sometimes he wouldn't speak at all, just stare into the camera, unmoving. In one particularly unsettling recording, Patient X began laughing mid-sentence, a dry, humorless sound that continued long after any words had ceased. The final tape, dated just 2 days before Bauer's disappearance, showed the patient in an entirely altered state. He appeared calm, even confident, no longer disturbed by his dreams. He claimed the shadow had shown him the truth. "Integration is not healing," he said. "It is surrender." His last words on the recording were delivered directly into the camera. "You must be willing to disappear." The footage ended abruptly, with Bauer reaching for something off-screen, followed by a sudden blackout. No identity for Patient X was ever uncovered. No witnesses recalled seeing anyone of his description at the clinic. His face never appeared in any public records. Psychological professionals who reviewed the tapes were divided. Some believed the man was psychotic. Others feared Bauer had gone too far in exploring the darker side of Jungian theory, accidentally unleashing or creating a pathology that defied traditional diagnosis. Yet the most unsettling theory remained unspoken by most but whispered by a few: that Patient X was not just a patient at all, but a manifestation of Bauer's own shadow, recorded in real time as his mind fractured, one session at a time. Elena Voss was a graduate student at the Zurich Institute of Depth Psychology when she first came across the name Felix Bauer. Her thesis focused on dream analysis within the Jungian tradition, and Bauer's early papers on symbolic patterning in sexually charged dreams stood out for their boldness and meticulous structure. Though he had been missing for years, his ideas struck Elena as far ahead of their time. As she dug deeper, she realized that much of Bauer's work had never been published or even cataloged. With a growing sense of curiosity and unease, she requested access to Bauer's personal archive, which had been quietly sealed and stored in the Institute's lower vaults. What Elena found surpassed even her most ambitious expectations. Among the stacks of yellowing notebooks and taped cassette recordings were hundreds of pages of handwritten notes, dream charts, and references to a secret project Bauer had only briefly mentioned in his known work, something he called the Mirror Protocol. According to these hidden documents, Bauer had been conducting covert psychological experiments outside his formal practice. He had recruited a dozen patients, all exhibiting symptoms of deep repression, shame, and unresolved sexual trauma, and subjected them to an intensive dream induction process designed to provoke direct confrontation with their sexual shadow. Each patient's progress had been tracked through dream journaling, symbolic drawing exercises, and mirror exposure sessions. a controversial method involving prolonged eye contact with one's reflection under low light. Bauer believed the mirror acted as a threshold between the conscious self and the unconscious shadow. Most patients reacted with discomfort. Some wept. A few reported hallucinations. One, according to his notes, saw the face of another looking back. Elena noticed an increasing paranoia in Bauer's later entries. He described strange occurrences in his home, feelings of being followed, and the sensation that something had crossed over from the unconscious realm into waking life. He wrote that one patient in particular had become unreadable and resistant to dream mapping. This individual, labeled only as the carrier, showed no fear, no shame, and no internal resistance. Bauer noted that his dreams stopped evolving, a sign, he believed, that the man's psyche had fully merged with the shadow. He dreams no longer, Bauer wrote. He is the dream. Obsessed and disturbed, Elena began tracking down names from Bauer's notes. Many had changed addresses, some had changed identities, and a few were listed as deceased, 2 from apparent suicides. She reached out to those she could find, but none agreed to speak with her. One man emailed only a single sentence: "You don't dig up the shadow, it digs up you." Then Elena herself disappeared. She was last seen leaving the institute late one evening, carrying a box of documents and cassette tapes. Her apartment was found locked, her belongings undisturbed. The only item missing was her research notebook. The Zurich Institute quietly closed access to Bauer's archive the following week. No formal announcement was made. Elena Voss was never found. But in the margins of one of Bauer's recovered journals, investigators later found a line written in red ink: "Another has entered the mirror." In the spring of 2001, nearly 14 years after the disappearance of Dr. Felix Bauer, a chilling pattern of deaths began to unfold in Berlin. 3 respected members of a private Jungian psychology society were found dead within weeks of each other. Though the victims were discovered in different locations across the city, each crime scene bore the same disturbing signature: a mirror placed beside the body, a single white feather gripped in the victim's left hand, and a page from Carl Jung's Red Book pinned to the wall above them. The pages were not random excerpts but appeared to be carefully chosen. Each passage referenced the shadow self and the necessity of confronting inner darkness. Authorities were baffled. There were no signs of forced entry in any of the residences. No clear motive. No connections between the victims beyond their association with the Jungian Society. All 3 had recently attended a weekend symposium on advanced shadow work, hosted at a countryside retreat outside Berlin. The symposium had promised an unfiltered exploration of the unconscious, and was led by a guest speaker referred to only as her why. None of the attendees could provide a full description of her why. They remembered a man in his 40s, well-spoken, with a calm demeanor and a deep knowledge of Jungian theory. But no one had taken a photograph. No registration records listed a speaker by that name. When police attempted to track the man down, they found nothing. No digital footprint, no known alias, no professional affiliation. It was as though her why had simply vanished after the retreat. As detectives examined the victim's personal effects, they discovered journals, scribbled notes, and printed dream diagrams reminiscent of Bauer's methodology. One victim had written about seeing a figure in a dream, shaped like a man but without a face, standing behind a mirror. Another described a series of dreams in which they were chased through narrow hallways by a second version of themselves. The most unsettling entry was found in the journal of the 3rd victim, who had scrawled a final, cryptic line before his death. He said, "If I see the shadow clearly, it will set me free." But I only saw darkness. Endless, grinning darkness. Psychologists familiar with Bauer's lost work began to speculate, quietly and only among trusted peers, that these deaths were not merely ritualistic but may have been part of an intentional process. A purification, a release of the shadow through death. Some suspected that her Y was a former patient of Bauer's, possibly even patient X himself, continuing a twisted legacy of shadow integration through violent means. Others suggested that her Y was simply an idea, a manifestation of a psychological virus planted in the minds of those who stared too long into themselves. The case remained unsolved. The Jungian Society quietly disbanded and the retreat center closed permanently. Years later, a lone detective revisiting the case wrote in his private log, "This is not murder in the traditional sense. This is belief weaponized. It's someone using Jung like a scalpel not to heal, but to cut something loose." In 2023, a true crime podcaster named Jacob Wren began investigating cold cases with occult or psychological elements. His popular series, Threshold, had already explored cult activity in Eastern Europe and unsolved ritual murders in Scandinavia. But when a listener emailed him a brief tip about the Felix Bauer case, Jacob found himself spiraling down a path far darker than anything he had previously encountered. The email simply read, "Look into the reflection room." Patient X never left. Intrigued, Jacob began to dig. After weeks of combing through archived forum threads, encrypted websites, and decommissioned digital libraries, he uncovered a link to an invitation-only discussion board on the dark web known as the Reflection Room. It was unlike any community he had encountered, not a place for amateurs or casual conspiracy theorists, but a meticulously curated space for individuals who shared one unifying belief: the unconscious is not just a concept, but a living realm, and the shadow, particularly the sexual shadow, is its most powerful gatekeeper. The forum was filled with cryptic threads, diagrams based on Jung's archetypal system, and dream analyses that closely mirrored Bauer's unpublished work. One user stood out among the rest. Posting under the name Mirrorman, this individual had been active for over a decade, dropping deeply philosophical and often disturbing monologues about the process of dissolution, absorption, and erasure of the ego through shadow binding. Mirrorman claimed that Felix Bauer had not disappeared but had been reborn through him, that he had helped Bauer transcend the limits of self by letting the sexual shadow devour what remained of his conscious identity. Jacob traced Mirrorman's activity through a string of old IP logs that led to a rural property outside Geneva, long abandoned and nearly forgotten. Armed with a camera crew and a few basic supplies, Jacob entered the crumbling farmhouse, documenting every moment for his podcast. Inside, he found walls covered in handwritten quotes from Jung, mirrors smashed and reassembled into chaotic collages, and candles melted into pools around circular symbols drawn in ash. There were hundreds of pages of writing, stacked in piles and stuffed into jars, each page repeating strange mantras. He who sees himself is no longer himself, and the mirror remembers. The most shocking discovery was a wall covered in printed photographs, headshots, some blurry, some recent, of known Jungian psychologists who had disappeared over the last 40 years. At the center of the wall was a photo of Elena Voss, circled in red ink, her eyes scratched out. Beneath her photo, Jacob found a small envelope. Inside was a single Polaroid. It showed a mirror in a dark room. In the reflection was a man standing alone, smiling, and behind him, barely visible, a second figure emerging from the shadows. Jacob's episode about the farmhouse went viral, but shortly after its release, he deleted his social media accounts and vanished. A week later, his producer received a USB drive containing a distorted audio file. In Jacob's voice, layered with static, one sentence played on a loop: "The mirror doesn't reflect you. It reveals what you've denied." No trace of Jacob Wren has been found. Investigators who reviewed his footage reported experiencing vivid nightmares for weeks. One resigned, leaving only a note behind. You cannot study the shadow. You can only become it.